Howdy, folks. So I've had a couple people ask me, how do they get an image to show up so only half the image is showing? Um, I mean, the simplest answer to that is, of course, go into an image editor and cut the image in half, but you don't always want to do that. Because sometimes you want to show the full image somewhere and you don't want to save it two places. Sometimes you only want to show it half the image partially or some of the time and then be using your page to dynamically show the rest of it. Um, So we're going to go over how to do that. There's a couple of different ways. It depends on if you're using a background image or a standard image tag. So I've got this forest image here, and we're just going to see if we can display only half of it. So let's get our index page in here. So the first thing let's look at is how do we do it if it's a background image, okay? So background images are a little funky regardless, because they don't expand the size of the image, but if you're using that, it can work. So let's set this class, background image, and then let's put a style in here. Okay, background image, and then we're actually going to set the background image, which is a URL, and I'm just going to say the forest image there. Text here, just put some content in it, and let's open that up. All right, so now you can see a couple things. This does take up the full width of the screen, and it takes up only the height of the content, which is expected. It's also tiling the image. Um, so let's just manually go in here. Let's see. This image is, how big is this image? Let's take a look. So if I go into here, properties, details, this is 612 by 398. Okay, 612 by 398. So let's just set this here. 612, oops, 398 pixels, and the width 612 pixels. Um, Normally you'd have this stretched to your content. But let's see if we load that. Okay, so now we see the full image. And note that I had to actually manually take my div and make it the width of the background image because the background image does not necessarily get that big. So, or rather, the div does not get as big as the image by default. So what if I just set this to 200 pixels? Whoops, that's the height. Width. If I set the width 300 pixels, it does cut off half the image, but it kind of, so that can work if you just set it to half. Something that you can do though, like maybe you don't want necessarily that half of the image to be cut off. Maybe you want the other half, so maybe you want to have this half of the image and not that half. So what you can do is you can actually set the background position. So there's background position X and Y. So if I do Y, I could see negative 50% on this. And then if I set my width to 300, oh, it didn't like that, did it? What has it done here? It's done something funky there. Let's see. So that did shift it a little bit, I think, but it doesn't seem to have shifted it much. I think because of the width. So let's see. If we set this again to 300, okay, this here. Okay, so we kind of got that set, and this is the first half. Now let's say if we shift this. What happens if we, okay. So we're shifting that here. Okay, so if we just set it actually to 100%, then it shows the correct one. Probably because this is actually kind of what it's doing. So here's 0. Okay, so here's the main one. And background position actually affects not the width of the background image, but the width of the container. So if I go to negative 50, it's actually moving it to half of the container's height. So you can see I see half of what I want. So actually I need to do negative 100. Now I get the other half of it. This only works though because the width of the forest image of my container is half that of the image. But let's say that we wanted that full image, right? Maybe we want this to be something a little more awkward, like maybe We want it to be a full 612, but we only want half the image to show. Well, what you can do there is, first of all, we need to get it so only half the image is showing. We can use background size for that. That's not what I want. Background size. And if we set this to 50%, it does that. Let's see if we have a background size or background width. No, that doesn't exist. Interesting. Okay, so I think what we need to do is we actually need to do background size, but we need to do two parameters, so width and height. There we go. Now you can see it it's taking up 50% of this, and it's kind of stretched as well. So this isn't super ideal. If I wanted this to be like maybe halfway off the screen, so I guess you probably wouldn't want a case where you do this. If I want this to be halfway off the screen at this point, then what you might need to do, so like let's say you had some content over here and some content over here, you might need to actually put this into a wrapper. So if I have like background image outer, and then we put our background image in here, so then we actually put the width then on the background image outer here, and then we take this one and we move it by 50%. So now you can see that is still off, but our image outer is still that full size. You are getting a little overlap there with that margin. What we can do to fix that is we can just set overflow to hidden. And then that chops that off. So what this is basically doing, we're not changing the size or anywhere that this actual background image thing is set here. What we're doing is we're just kind of shifting it by 50% off, and then we're 50% off, 50% to the left. That's done with the margin left. And so that you can see that's only half the image. The second thing that you could do here is you might just have an image tag. And this would be forest image, JPEG. Okay, so if we have just an image tag, this one, you can modify this a little bit. Like if you say width 50%, it does get smaller, but it also shrinks the whole thing. And if you change the aspect ratio, it kind of screws up. Basically, the way that if you want to do half the image here, you kind of have to do the same thing as what we did above. So background, let's just say image outer. So image outer, at this point, this kind of gets, well, let's see what it does. So if I take my image and I actually make this margin left 50%, and then I take image outer and I say overflow hidden, to actually pop this up here on this one as well. Okay, so you can see that kind of works a little bit. Like if I go, let's see, if I come back to 0 here, this is there. But really, this is, to get that half, it's more like 37, right? And that's because this is getting the margin based on the parent. And the parent doesn't have that set width, right? This image has this, but the parent doesn't. So what we could also do is we could set our parent to display inline block, which should make it wrap, I think. There we go. Now this appropriate, because if you do display block, which is the default for a div, it takes up the whole width. And then when I do this minus 50%, that is not minus 50% of the element itself, it's minus 50% of its parent width, which is why it goes way further than it should. But if we turn this on to inline block, what happens here in CSS is it actually takes, the parent now takes the width from the child content. Then the child content offsets itself by half the parent width, so it looks appropriate like this. Anyway, sorry that was a little bit rambling. I know that CSS is really complicated, and some of these things, you know, are not forefront in my mind. But anyway, that's two ways of doing it. basically it kind of comes down to the same thing. The margin left is probably one of the easiest to do. But if you don't want to do that, the other thing you can do is actually utilize the background position to shift the image off screen. But you do have to be a little careful with that because it can do some weird stuff. Anyway, I hope that was helpful to someone, and I'll see you all next time.